call it a statement, just know like. So like, yeah, it's like a social like yeah.
It would have been an even bigger turnout.
Really, I feel honored to show up.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event. It brings me a lot of excitement to introduce a fireside chat with Kevin Tan at the Berkeley Forum. And I am Lucy Shane. I'm the president of this organization, and I'd like to start this event with land acknowledgement. So the Berkeley Forum would like to take this time to acknowledge that our events in UC Berkeley's campus sit on the territory of the Ohlone people, and that we benefit from the occupation of this land. It is important to us that we recognize the history out of the respect for the Ohlone who are still present in Berkeley and the Bay Area today. For more Native education resources on campus, we encourage you to look into the Centers for Educational Justice and Community Engagement. I'd also like to give recognition to our student organization partner for this event, CMG Strategy Consulting, and I'd like to pass things off to Noah Oppenheimer, who is the VP of External at CMG.
Thank you. My name is Noah. As she said, I'm VP of External for an organization called CMG Strategy Consulting. We are a student-led consulting organization on campus that works with everything from Fortune 500 to high-growth companies. Some past clients include companies like Google, Lyft, Salesforce, so on and so forth. And we're really excited to be helping to part of this event with some of the marketing and other outreach because we think it's just such an exciting speaker here today. And then also just want to plug that we're hosting a case competition with a venture capital firm called Picus Capital. And would really encourage you to check that out by going to our social media, just at Berkeley CMG on Instagram if you're interested in participating in that event.
Hello, I am Haley Liu, I'm the event manager. Some info about Kevin before we begin his fireside chat. He graduated Yale University with a degree in physics, but he's known for being the founder and CEO of Snackpass, an app I'm sure that all of you guys know. He began his startup as senior in college at Yale with co-founder Jamie Marshall. And Snackpass now has over 500,000 users across 13 college towns, and was recently featured on 2020's Forbes 30 Under 30 list.
And with that, I'd like to pass things on to the student moderator for tonight, Ansh, and let's get started.
Yeah, so before I start off, I want to let everyone in the audience know that we will be having an audience Q&A at the end, so please save your questions for that. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming out this evening, and thank you Kevin for taking the time for this fireside chat. It's a pleasure to have this break for us.
Thanks, Ash. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So I want to start with a question for the audience to get to know Snackpass and its initial journey a little bit better. So the first version of your idea initially took form as a website called Happy Hour, where students were able to receive discounts and free purchases. So how does Snackpass evolve from this original model into the social platform that it is today?
Yeah, it's funny. Whenever I'm doing an interview with like Berkeley students, I always dig up this dirt. I don't know how you found knew about that, but yeah. So we started off as like a website. Hold on, just a little bit back. Okay. No, sort of feedback. Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, well, let me just start a little bit before that. During my time at Yale, when I was an undergrad, I got really into coding and the allure of startups, and thought that was a really exciting thing to do. And I didn't know anything about. Maybe I just do about it.
I think we have a, do we have physical marks?
Can everyone, is this audible or?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Okay, cool. So yeah, I was super drawn to the idea of building something like from my laptop that would have a lot of value to everyone, and I didn't need permission or resources or anything. I could just kind of use my ideas. So that's how I got started on my journey. And then the specifically happy hour, I was trying to think. I had a lot of bad ideas that I went through and spent a lot of time, and they crashed and burned like these companies previously. And so with happy hour, the initial premise was what can I make that my roommates would be dumb not to use? That was like, because I was kind of tired of making stuff that no one used. That was like the problem. So I said, well, if we go out to these restaurants and get food, if you can get them at a cheaper price, then they'd be literally dumb not to use it. And so I knew some of the restaurants in the area. I like had a relationship with the restaurant owner. So I went around and signed them up and put them on a website. And you just log in with your Yale.edu email to get discounts. And yeah, we just put flyers up and used it. It's pretty interesting. But there were two insights in those early days that led to Snackpass and led it to be a much bigger opportunity. So the first was we eventually made it an app, and I just noticed that people came for the discounts, but they stayed for the convenience of being able to like show up and your food's ready. You don't have to wait in line. You don't have to talk to anyone, and you can just grab it. And you didn't even need a cashier. And so kind of had this realization that the entire like workflow of a register and a cashier was going to be deprecated at some point. And this was like the new in-store front end for the customer. And then the second big realization was when we were trying to make it grow a little faster, and adoption was okay, but you know, we had seen stories of like Tinder or Snap or Facebook spreading like wildfire on campuses. So I was thinking like if there's a way to tap into that social element in an e-commerce setting, that would be really interesting. And we had reward points at the time inspired by the Starbucks app. And so kind of had a light bulb moment, like what if you can send points to friends? It'd be kind of this, you know, natural, like organic viral loop. So those two things then ultimately, also the name, actually, that was the biggest thing. Because the problem, if you ever start a company, you probably know, like, you want it to have good SEO, so people can like Google it and find it. So if we just call it happy hour, like, it wouldn't, in the app store, it was like the 50th app. Like, I couldn't even find it. I was scrolling for a while. So I knew I had to change the name, eventually change it to Snackpass.
Yeah, so in past interviews, you also mentioned how you initially struggled to receive adequate funding to support operations during the early stages of Snackpass. So how did you manage to scale the company despite this initial lack of capital?
Well, a big part of it was I just built the original version myself. So kind of like from when I woke up to when I slept, I was just like coding. Kind of messed up my back when I was doing that. But yeah, the idea is just mostly software that you can kind of get by. I had some money saved up from doing like random software consulting gigs or like contractor work. And the only other piece was, yeah, I mean, so yeah, it was all just boots on the ground, like signing up restaurants, and I just did it all myself, and with Jamie too, when she joined. So didn't really need the money to prove out the traction. We got a lot of organic growth without paying for anything too, so that was cool. And then with that traction, we were able to raise money, and then that was pretty important because you have to build out like a full marketplace like platform. But you know, if you can, like, I guess, you know, startups, one mental model is that it's not really like a fully fledged company in the first place. It's more like an experiment of whether a company should exist. And so at every stage, at every funding round, you have certain proof points that you want to de-risk or prove out or proof points that you want to demonstrate to de-risk the next, you know, set of proof points. And then you just continually de-risk from there until you have a very durable and a durable company at scale. So yeah, so in the early days, I just kind of built myself, and that was enough traction, enough evidence to go and raise seed money.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to expand on this idea of building companies from the ground up. So unlike many college startups, Snackpass did not participate in an incubator or accelerator program to start. So how do you think this affected your initial growth strategy, as well as how Snackpass has scaled post-funding?
Honestly, I think it was awesome. Like, it didn't feel very good at the time to get rejected by our own college's entrepreneurship program in the summer. And they accepted a lot of people. So I was like, damn, like, it wasn't even YC. But then I had a lot of time. And also, I spent we spent, almost 8 months before it really kind of hit it off. And during that time, you just have a lot of time to like sort of think about it and learn about the little details and dive into the problem and try a bunch of stuff. And it's almost like you let it bake for longer, and then you set it up for more success. Like, one interesting thing, like, I think someone like Jay-Z or Kanye, like there's like this like late bloomer effect that I think like they didn't make it until they were like late 20s, but honestly that allowed them to have a lot more skill and sort of foundation that they can, maybe when they did hit it, like have a much higher ceiling versus if they hit it really early. But I don't know, maybe that's the thing. Anyways, for us, I did feel like not having the funding led to a lot of set us up for success in a way. Like one very tangible example is because we didn't have the funding, we didn't have money to acquire customers. Like DoorDash reads would spend like $20 per person, like free delivery. So we had to figure out a way to get users organically, and that led to a stronger product. So yeah, I think there's definitely that.
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned YC, but did your strategies end up changing after you got accepted into the Y Combinator? And for those who aren't familiar with what the Y Combinator is, it's an accelerator that provides seed funding for startups.
Yeah, I think, well, I didn't know anything about that entire world of venture capital, just the whole history of startups before Snackpass, all the way to like pre-.com era. And there's people who in the industry have seen all of that. So it was kind of, yeah, so I got exposed to a lot of the almost like the oral history of startups, which I think that's ultimately what it is. It's just an oral history. I don't think it's a science. I think there's a lot of like mental models or patterns that people write about as if there are like laws of nature, but ultimately like the internet's been around for like 30 years. Like, so, but yeah, I did get exposed to a lot of that, and some of the possible outcomes, like Snackpass could be like this company or like this outcome. So it did help me think a little bit bigger, and I didn't realize you could have like that much capital to go and do something. But also I didn't realize like how much capital it takes to like build, like to build like a platform that has like enterprise level software. Like that takes a lot of engineering manpower, and engineers are hella expensive. So yeah, so it definitely was a new experience and changed the course. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to expansion, it's evident that a lot of this progress has been driven by college students, but I'd be curious in learning about, does Snackpass plan to have the same reach in cities as well? And if so, how would Snackpass's strategies differ in cities in comparison to college towns?
Yeah, well, we see, I mean, ultimately we think every restaurant should use Snackpass globally. So that's definitely the ambition. The strategy with post-college students, and this is something that we talk about in our secret session after the live feed turns off, but it's something that we thought a lot about during the pandemic, actually, because there were no students around. So we had to think like, okay, well, we got to do something in the meantime, and let's think about how we're helping our restaurants and how they can get access to all customers, not just students. So it's something we're thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing the different strategies that Snackpass has implemented for the years. I'd now like to delve a little bit deeper into the creative design and the development process itself. So Snackpass has branded itself as a food pickup app targeted towards Gen Z and millennials. How did this target population inform Snackpass's platform design?
Well, initially, I don't really like and then I guess our team. There's maybe like to create a straw man. There's like two ways to look at the product and design like that. One is to think about like what your audience is and to cater towards that audience. Maybe it's like Gen Z, and so you try to, I don't know, have like crazy grading colors and I don't know, something like that. Or, but I think another more useful framework is like thinking about what the jobs to be done are of the user. So this is like a framework from this guy named Clayton Christensen who wrote Innovator's Dilemma, which is a great book. So it's not like, you know, like, why am I buying this boba? Is it because I'm like a coastal Asian male in his 20s? And it's like, oh, I woke up, I realized I'm Asian and a coastal male, so I'm gonna go and buy boba. Like, no. So I bought boba because I was thirsty and I wanted something that was like really, that had some caffeine, but not too much caffeine and tasted awesome. That has nothing to do with my demographic. So people hire products to do jobs in their life. And this is doing a better job than say like a cappuccino for me right now because of its attributes. So when we're thinking about our audience, we think about what they want. What are the jobs they hire Snackpass to do? And it's to, one, save time, skipping the line, and two, save money through rewards and discounts, and three, to connect with friends. So when thinking about the product design, we just kind of think about those three jobs to be done.
Yeah.
We don't really envision like a Gen Z person.
Got it. So I mean, you kind of mentioned designing an interactive platform. You mentioned colors. I'd be interested in learning because on Snackpass, users can gift their friends rewards, have food party orders, have chickens. What do you think is the impact of kind of socializing these everyday transactions?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to those three pillars. So, I mean, those are really related to the first pillar of convenience, but first, you know, everyone likes to save money or get a deal. Honestly, there might be two different things. And the key to that part is also, how does it benefit the merchant? And so the merchant just like discounting by itself, that's not great, but if we can use it as a way to help bring them incremental customers, like basically turning their customers into ambassadors or like marketing agents by referring to friends, then that's like a win-win. So that's a lot of the sort of social promotion formats are designed with the merchant in mind first. Like, how do we benefit them, and how do we use social as a way to bring them more orders? But yeah, I mean, we make it I think it's just natural that it's going to fit into people's lives in a way. Like, I remember someone telling me, I don't know if it was at Berkeley, but like they have like a thing in their calendar where their roommates like scheduled to do like a party order. That was pretty cool. But honestly, a lot of those you can't really predict how people are going to use it. Like, you make something and see how people will respond to it. But I think it has like the fundamentals of like saving time, saving money. You can always kind of count on.
Yeah, so I mean, we've discussed the user interface in depth, but it's also important that we discuss the role of the pricing model within the development stage. So many small business restaurant owners have expressed frustration with third-party food apps because they take a cut of profit from their sales. How does Snackpass compare in fees to other food commerce apps?
Yeah, well, quantitatively, it's an order of magnitude cheaper, more affordable than these delivery platforms. One of the reasons is because of our model. Like, we don't have like delivery drivers are extremely costly. Most delivery companies are like in the red in most markets, like Uber Eats and DoorDash. So like they haven't even figured out a way to make it work in a lot of markets. So they kind of have to charge a lot to the restaurant, and the restaurant marks up the menu to the customer. And then even despite that, they're still losing money. So then they have to get investment dollars. So it's almost basically an experiment of like how much VC money can get in the hands of like consumers for like subsidized delivery, with the hope that one day there's going to be one winner, maybe it's DoorDash or Uber, and they get to like raise their prices when all the competition has been beat. That's going on there. Yeah, for us, so I think maybe stepping back and looking at the whole picture, I think basically what happened is there was sort of this aggregator model that was applied to local restaurants in the same way like eBay or Booking.com, like these online marketplaces was applied. And with like Bookings.com, if I wasn't using that website or like Airbnb, like I wouldn't go to that hotel. So their take rate kind of makes sense. It's like a finder's fee. But with the restaurant delivery, it's kind of interesting because would I have gone to that restaurant if they were on DoorDash? Like possibly, very, very possibly. Maybe I would have driven there, or maybe I would have ordered directly from the restaurant. So the finder's fee is something that doesn't quite like sit right in a lot of cases. Sometimes it does, like for sure. And delivery is a huge value proposition, but there is this sort of discontent. So restaurants feel like there's like a devil's bargain they have of needing these delivery platforms, but not necessarily even being profitable on them. And then there's a sense of renting their customers and not owning their customers. So anyways, where we sit in all of that is we think we're trying to help restaurants, first of all, use digital technology to make the customer experience better, make them more efficient, but without losing all their economics while doing so. And then also, helping them get a more direct relationship with their customers.
Yeah, so I'd kind of like to take a more expansive look on this relationship between restaurants and customers. As many of us probably know, Snackpass streamlines the purchasing process such that customers can order without interacting with others, decreasing the number of face-to-face interactions. Given this evolving dynamic, how is the restaurant industry changing its approach to serving customers?
There's a lot of changes. There's changing customer expectations. So I guess any merchant is trying to keep up with what customers expect. It's more convenience, but also just with the pandemic and sort of the PPP loans drying up. And I think the biggest change is like, what are the most profitable business models that will allow restaurants to even stay open? And so I think we're seeing not quite a reset button, but just like for example, we're seeing a lot of restaurants that have been comfortable with the way they've been doing things for like 20 years. Start thinking about like being much more open to like new technology and new ways of doing it, whereas before the pandemic they weren't. So it's really like a big forcing function in restaurants. You think about like a parallel is like e-commerce brands. They were like started on the internet. Like they exist because of the internet and because of things like Shopify and Facebook ads. So they're like very savvy at using like digital tools, digital marketing. And whereas a lot of restaurants, like they started before the internet. So they're not as like internet native, but post-pandemic, I think that's going to change a lot. Not to mention a lot of we partner with a lot of restaurants that started in the past couple of years or the past 5 years. So they're much more internet native.
Yeah, so I mean, some critics actually argue that streamlining the purchasing process can actually detract from restaurants feeling like community spaces where employees and customers can get to know one another. So how do you think Snackpass affects the traditional role of restaurants being seen as these community building institutions?
Well, if they, I mean, in theory, like if they keep their wage the same, like their payroll, but then they use Snackpass, now that employee has more time to talk to people as opposed to like punching in orders, like something that is more of a automatable thing, and so they can spend their time on more human connection. So I think ultimately it's a choice for the restaurant, but what we're doing is giving them more tools to free them up from things they didn't have to do, and so they can invest those dollars into more community building. They can invest those dollars into lower prices for the customer or more development of like better products. I don't think it makes sense. Like that's the same argument. Like we might as well pay someone to like operate an elevator or something. Like I don't really buy that.
So I guess it's a perfect balance between automating stuff and then also meeting up with the customers that come in person, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's no sense in paying for something that you don't have to pay for. Like those dollars are valuable for a restaurant. That's the difference between them being, like staying open or not. And so when we give those dollars back to the restaurant, they can invest that in more community building, like more ambassadors who are just there to like ambassador, or they can invest that into opening more stores. So ultimately, like economic growth just comes from like more productivity.
So thank you so much for sharing your insights on social interaction and how that pertains to restaurants. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on startup culture. So the growing popularity of startup culture, many campuses are now having incubator and entrepreneurship programs. What is your take on the mainstreamification of startup culture in college spaces?
Mainstreamification. Well, I mean, I'm like a little weird. Like I always like to do things that like people aren't doing. So at Yale at the time, like no one's doing startups, and like I like that. I think if I was at like Stanford, Berkeley, like everyone's doing startup, I would be like I would do something else. But ultimately that's great because there's not really a shortage of capital. There's a shortage of like ideas and talent and people working on stuff. So that's great, and a shortage of experience. So. I do think that the shortage isn't the shortage of accelerators, it's the shortage of people building the companies. So I think an accelerator here or there is good, but I mean, you don't really need an accelerator to start a company. But yeah, no, I think generally it means, I mean, if it's an alternative to like going into consulting or something, that's pretty cool.
A common theme that I'm sure you might have noticed is a lot of startup founders in college often face pressure to drop out due to the high time commitment that startups require. What advice would you give to college students who are struggling to balance their academic and entrepreneurial commitments?
Like, I guess maybe you want your cake and eat it too, but I get interesting questions. Like one person asked me, he was like, yeah, I'm trying to start a company, and then like I've heard that it's better to be a domain expert when starting, but then I've also heard that like it's better to go into a new industry fresh. Like, what's the better route? And then I thought about it, it's like, it's interesting that you think there's an answer to that. Like, there's plenty of companies where the person didn't know anything about the industry. There's plenty of companies where the person was a domain expert. Like, is there a formula? At the end of the day, like, a successful company, like a unicorn, they're making is defined by potentially 100 million in annual revenue. Does the market, like, do the customers care how you get there? Like, not really. So what basically, I mean, if you can do it if you can be a student and figure out something and then test out your hypothesis, then raise money and then drop out, like, then by all means. But it's very possible that it's really hard to do that, and you have to like devote the time. Like I had to devote the time. Spent like 6 months after I graduated just working on Snackpass. I don't think there's a formula. All else being equal, the more time you have to spend on your idea probably will prop it up for success more than if you spent a quarter of your time. But maybe there's people who can do that and take classes. So. I don't want to be prescriptive on these kind of things. I don't think there's an answer.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned this earlier, you kind of touched on it. One of the advices that you shared for aspiring student founders is to find product market fit early in the process. How, if at all, did you navigate this in the context of Snackpass?
And also I think it's something that can continually be found or continually added on. Like, for example, Uber started out with like limos, like black car, and then it wasn't until their Series B that they saw like Lyft doing rideshare and they realized that's the killer model, and they switched, and now they're bigger than Uber. So did they have product market fit in the Series A? Like, to an extent, but it's constantly refined. So I don't think it's like a switch, although some people think that. I think every company is a little different. But sorry, your question is what's the advice?
How did you navigate finding a product market fit early in the process when you were building Snackpass? Kind of honing in.
Yeah,
on your
well,
customer.
I think what kind of helped in the beginning was I really started with that premise, like what would be something my roommates would be dumb not to use? Because before that, I was like, I had some other startup projects, and it was really like coming from the angle of like, wouldn't this be a cool company? But that's like a terrible angle to go about because it might be something that no one cares about. It's not solving any problems. It's not something people find value in. And so I think it's a pretty healthy angle to say like, what's something that like would be undeniably useful for people, such that they'd be almost like irrational not to use the product or service. I don't know, like that's probably related to product market fit. But also like, yeah, it's a lot of like exploring. I think it's okay. I've seen so many examples, like us included, Uber, I don't know, like Tesla, like you have an initial thesis, but then it doesn't work out. And that's like perfectly fine. And you just, if you're kind of like in a space that's interesting, you gotta like just learn more about it and figure out like what is the biggest opportunities in those space. You don't have to like start with that video. No customer cares if you were wrong at the beginning, as long as you get to the right answer. Maybe there's even another company that already got there, but they're doing a terrible job. So at the end of the day, all that matters is like creating that killer product, and then the economic aspects of it too. Like in order to sustain like profits and growth, like it has to be defensible. You have to be able to have sort of a monopolistic demand.
Yeah, so thank you.